Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. The conversion of dozens of intelligent scientists and researchers in China after studying the Quran. Initially, they underestimated the contents of the Quran, but after that, they were surprised by what they found. They cried, converting because they saw the facts and scientific evidence of the truth of the Quran. Let's listen to this exciting story, and hopefully those who subscribe will have their fortunes smoothed. In a sophisticated research center in Beijing, the atmosphere in the conference room felt so tense. Dozens of the best scientists in the country sat in a circle, staring at the large screen displaying the title of their new research. Usually they study the theory of quantum space exploration or advanced genetics, but this time they were faced with something very different. An ancient book that is claimed to contain scientific truth since more than 1,400 years ago, the Quran. Professor Zhang, a senior astrophysicist, stood in front of them with a serious expression. "The government has given us this task," he said while glancing at the screen. "Many say that the Quran contains scientific knowledge that humans could not have known in its time. We will test it objectively using modern scientific methods." Several scientists chuckled. "So we are asked to prove that religious books have scientific truth?" said Dr. Liu, a biologist known as an atheist. "Don't we all know that science and religion do not go hand in hand?" But not all agreed with that skeptical attitude. Wang, an oceanographer, added, "There are verses that describe natural phenomena accurately. Isn't it interesting to know how it can happen?" Professor Zhang nodded. "That's why we are here. Are these verses just coincidences, or is there something more?" They had spent their lives pursuing knowledge, but no one would have imagined that their journey would lead them to the path of God. On the screen, the research began. The great universe to the development of the fetus in the womb, all have been written in the book that they consider to be an ancient legend. No one knew that this journey would shake their beliefs to the deepest roots. In the most advanced research center in China, a search for truth had just begun. The door to the research room opened, and a group of scientists moved into the main laboratory. The room was spacious, filled with high-tech computers, sophisticated telescopes connected to satellites, and various scientific analysis tools. In the middle of the room, a giant screen displayed a list of verses from the Quran that they were about to study. All those present stared at the screen with different expressions, some curious, some doubtful, some cynical. Professor Zhang stepped forward and pressed a button on the tablet in his hand. "Okay, let's start with one of the biggest claims of Muslims about the universe. In the Quran, there is a verse that states that the universe was originally united before being separated." On the screen, a verse from the Quran appeared. "Do the unbelievers not know that the heavens and the earth were both united? Then we separated them." Quran, Surah 30. The room fell silent. Some scientists furrowed their brows while others started typing on their computers, searching for relevant scientific theories. Sun, a cosmologist researching the origins of the universe, widened his eyes. "This sounds like the Big Bang Theory." He almost sounded skeptical. "But this is just a coincidence. It couldn't be anything more than a made-up interpretation." Professor Zhang shook his head. "Let's look deeper. According to the Big Bang Theory, about 13.8 billion years ago, the universe was indeed at a single point before it exploded and expanded into what we see today. This fact was only discovered in the 20th century after the detection of cosmic background radiation. But this Quran verse stated it more than 1,400 years ago." Wang swallowed hard. How could they know? There were no telescopes or satellites at that time. Many people still believed the earth was flat. Silence enveloped the room again. Skepticism began to shift to shock. Scientists who had previously dismissed the study now stared at the screen, filled with questions. Professor Zhang continued, "Okay, let's look at another verse. The Quran also mentions that the universe is expanding, and the heavens we have built with our power, and indeed we are really expanding them." Quran, Surah Ad-Dariyat, 47. Dr. Sun turned towards Professor Zhang. "It is impossible. The theory of the expansion of the universe was only confirmed by Edwin Hubble in 1929. Previously, scientists thought that the universe was static. How could this book know this? Dr. Chen, who was the most skeptical from the start, now sat in silence. He stared at the screen with a blank expression, his mind spinning. Professor Zhang observed his colleagues. So far, we have not found any errors in this claim. This theory that we have, one that was only discovered in the last few centuries, was written in this book much earlier. Dr. Liu, who had also been skeptical from the beginning of this research, took a deep breath. Is this just a coincidence? Or is there something bigger behind all this? No one answered. They were all lost in their own thoughts. But one thing was certain. Their beliefs began to waver. They had come to this room with the intention of proving that the Quran was just an ordinary ancient book. But now they began to doubt that assumption. Silence still enveloped the sophisticated research room. The scientists, who were previously so sure of their scientific understanding, were now filled with doubt. They had never imagined that the Quran would describe the origins of the universe so accurately, but their research was not finished. Now they would enter the next stage, studying the verses of the Quran that talk about the creation of man. Dr. A biologist who had been skeptical from the start, stood in front of a large screen. His hands trembled slightly as he read aloud. And indeed, we created man from an essence of clay. Then we made him a drop of semen in a firm lodging, the womb. Then we made the semen into a clot. Then we made the clot into a lump of flesh. Then we made the lump into bones. Then we covered the bones with flesh. Then we developed him into another creation. So blessed is Allah, the best of creators. Quran, Surah Al-Mu'minun, 12-14. For a few seconds, no one spoke. All the scientists read the verse attentively. Dr. Liu finally broke the silence. This is very specific. This verse explains, step by step, how the human fetus is formed in the womb. He swallowed hard. Then this fact was only discovered after microscope technology was invented, allowing us to observe fetal development in the womb. How could a human in the 1st century have known this? Professor Zhang crossed his arms over his chest. Let's compare this with modern embryology research. They quickly accessed the scientific research findings on fetal development. They compared the stages mentioned in the verse with these findings and fell silent. In the early stages, the fetus is indeed just a clot of blood before turning into flesh and then forming bones, said Dr. Liu with a trembling voice. Then the bones are indeed wrapped in muscle tissue, exactly as written in this verse. Dr. Wang, who had been silent, finally spoke. This doesn't make sense. This theory was only confirmed in the 20th century, but the Quran had stated it long before. The room grew heavier. No one dared to refute. Their skepticism began turning into fear. This cell. They have mentioned something extraordinary, but the research is finished. Huang, a forensic expert, typed something on his computer. He then displayed the following verse. Does man think that we will not assemble his bones? Indeed, we are able to proportion his fingertips perfectly. Quran, Surah Al-Qiyamah, 3-4. Fingertips, murmured Huang. This is not just about bones. He pointed at the screen. We know that every human has unique fingerprints, and this fact is part of modern forensic science. Near the screen, the fingerprint image next to the verse appeared identical. Even identical twins have different fingerprint patterns. But how is it possible that this book highlighted fingers as something unique more than 1,000 years ago? No one answered. They all fell silent, lost in thought. Professor Zhang took a deep breath. We came here believing that we would prove this book wrong, but so far we have found facts that are hard to deny. Some scientists began to show anxious expressions. They felt as if their entire understanding of the world was crumbling. Dr. Wang finally said, I don't know what to say. This is too much of a coincidence. If only 1 or 2 verses aligned with modern science, we might call it luck. But so far, every claim we have investigated has turned out to be true. Dr. Liu, who was initially skeptical, now appeared deep in thought. The most against this research now looks the most shocked. He stares at the screen with slightly watery eyes. If this is true, if this book is indeed from God, then we have been living a lie all this time. The room is getting quieter. Some scientists start to bow their heads, trying to understand what they have just discovered. They have spent their lives seeking the truth through science, but never thought that the truth was actually stored in the book they had ignored. After a few minutes of silence, the professor finally says, "Our research is not finished. We still have to check other phenomena mentioned in the Quran, but I have to be honest. I am starting to feel that we are not researching an ordinary book." No one denies it. Something in their hearts begins to change, and without them realizing it, the light of truth begins to seep into their hearts. Silence still envelops the sophisticated laboratory. The scientists who were previously so convinced of the superiority of science over all things are now starting to be filled with confusion and fear. They have discovered the accuracy of the verses of the Quran about the universe and the creation of man, something that should not be possible if the book were just an ancient writing. But their research is not finished. There are still more phenomena to investigate, deeper mysteries that will shake their hearts even more. Professor Zhang presses a button on the tablet in his hand, and the giant screen in front of them displays the next verse. "And it is he who lets the two seas flow side by side. One is fresh and sweet, and the other is salty and bitter. And he makes between them a wall and a boundary that is impenetrable." Quran, Surah Al-Furqan 25:53. Dr. Wang, an oceanography expert, steps forward and reads the verse carefully. "It talks about seas that do not mix," he says. Professor Zhang nods. "Yes, Islam claims that there is a difference between two types of seawater that flow side by side but do not mix with each other." Some scientists frown. They think this is impossible. Water should naturally mix when it meets, but with modern technology, scientists have found that this phenomenon does exist. Dr. Wang presents the results of their latest oceanography research. "We have found this phenomenon in several places, such as the Strait of Gibraltar and the confluence of the Amazon River with the Atlantic Ocean. There is a difference in salinity and density that causes the two waters to remain separate." Everyone's eyes were fixed on the screen, staring at the satellite images showing how these two oceans meet but do not mix. Dr. Chen, who had been skeptical all this time, now looked confused. Was it possible for anyone to observe this with the naked eye in the first century? How could Muhammad have known this? The room felt heavier. No one could answer that question, but they all began to realize that they were facing something bigger than they had ever imagined. Professor Zhang sighed. "Panang, okay, let's move on to the next phenomenon." He pressed another button on his tablet and the screen changed again. Now what appeared was a verse about fire on the seabed. Bigger than, and in the ocean there was a burning fire. Quran, Surah 6. Dr. Chen immediately tensed up. As a volcanologist, he understood very well that this was not nonsense. "I know about this phenomenon," he said in a low voice. "Underwater volcanoes." All scientists' eyes were on him. There was a crack in the seabed that was emitting lava with a temperature of thousands of degrees Celsius. This was one of the greatest mysteries in geology because the ocean should have extinguished the fire. But in fact, the lava continued to burn under high pressure. His hands were shaking as he typed something on his computer and displayed footage from an underwater expedition that had been done. With the video, it was clearly visible, like fire burning on the seabed, a sight that could not have been imagined by someone in the first century. "This is the science of this, in the end," one of the scientists muttered. The room was filled with an uneasy silence. Many of them, atheists or Christians, had come to this laboratory to prove that the Quran was just an ancient book, not a revelation from God. But the evidence they found actually led them in a different direction. Dr. Liu lowered his head. "If all this is true, then all this time, we have been living in a lie." Professor Ang looked at his colleagues. his eyes beginning to fill with tears. He never imagined that this research would shake him. I don't know how to react, he said. I have dedicated my life to science. I believe that all things can be explained by science. But now I see something that is beyond our understanding. The room Kalinyabera Iluwan began to shed tears. They never thought that their search would end like this. After a while, Doctor, Huang finally said in a trembling voice, I want to know more about Islam. Everyone's eyes were on him, but Ali, who had mocked them before, just nodded slowly. Me too, said Dr. Wang. And I, continued Dr. Chen. One by one, those who had once been annoyed, peacocks, Sesu, and even Kikan Profangus, now stood in silence. This water, then we are one, Dharma Iskashin finally said. It was the day that changed their lives. Arriving in the sophisticated laboratory, they stood in front of computer screens displaying scientific evidence from all over the world. Dozens of scientists, once atheists and skeptics, now stood in rows, closing their eyes, taking a deep breath. Then, with full sincerity, they recited the two sentences of the Shahada. I bear witness that there is no God but Allah, and I bear witness that Muhammad is the messenger of Allah. Tears of emotion broke out throughout the room. They never thought that the research they had been conducting, originally meant to disprove the Quran, would lead them to the truth. Now they knew they had found something more valuable than mere scientific theory. They had found faith. In a sophisticated research center in China, the light of Islam shone brighter. Earlier that morning, the atmosphere in the research center felt different. The room, usually filled with scientific discussions and the sound of keyboards clicking, was now filled with a silence full of meaning. Scientists, who had always placed logic above all else, now sat in deep contemplation, reflecting on something greater than just their research. Professor Zhang stood in front of a large glass window, overlooking the cityscape. The sound of the call to prayer echoed faintly in the distance. I keep thinking, if the Quran is true, if everything we have discovered is the truth, then what does this mean for our lives? He murmured. Professor Zhang turned toward his colleagues, looking at each of them. Arya sighed. We have to admit that we have lived in ignorance, he said. I'm in, another voice whispered. Tears welled up in Kebahan Kat's eyes. I am too, he said. Buhan nodded. Because some of those people in Diang, they have understood far more about the hidden truth than we ever did. Dr. Wang finally broke his silence. For years, I refused to believe in God. I dismissed faith as an illusion. He paused, his voice breaking. But now I see the truth. A deep silence filled the room. I think we all feel the same way, another scientist admitted. I don't know how we can continue our lives as usual after this, someone whispered. At that moment, they all knew. This was more than just a scientific discovery. This was the beginning of a new journey. We have found something bigger than Sakar. Our research has found clues to that room. This time, everyone looks at each other, waiting for someone to, I testify, be Muhammadusan Allah. Crying, moved, K. Piahir, Sean. This one, Mpikta Taratutukya. Hi, them, they, myrrh, real peace. In the laboratory room filled with giggles, they hear Sain and Danan contradicting each other, complimenting each other. And in the research center, the sophisticated development has begun. In the following days, the sound in the research center changed. The room that was previously full of scientific discussions also became a reference for reading the Quran, not as an object of research, but as a guide to life. They spend time outside of work hours to learn to pray, understand the meaning of prayer, and feel a peace they have never experienced before. Professor Zhang, who used to only believe in the laws of physics, now often sits alone in his laboratory, contemplating the greatness of God. His research, indeed the sky, his telescope realizes that every star, every galaxy is not a coincidence. There is a miracle behind everything. There is a creator who regulates every second of life in this universe. News about scientists who converted to Islam began to spread. Some of their colleagues, who were still skeptical, came to challenge their findings. But the more who came, the more who eventually followed in their footsteps. What was initially just scientific research has now become an unexpected spiritual movement, until finally the research center has become not only a place for scientific exploration, but also a place for searching deeper truth. The scientists realized that they had discovered something far more valuable than mere theory or numbers. They had found the true meaning of life, and under the vast Chinese sky, among the sophisticated laboratories and high-tech equipment, the light of Islam continued to shine, illuminating the hearts of those who were once doubtful but had now found the undeniable truth. They were no longer just fact-seeking scientists, but also servants who prostrated themselves to the Creator. Since reciting the Shahada, the lives of the scientists at the research center changed drastically. They no longer saw the world through materialistic glasses alone, but with a broader understanding that science is only one way to get to know the Creator. Professor Zhang, who previously only believed in the laws of physics, now often spent his nights contemplating, observing the stars while admiring. The greatness of Allah, who had created the universe so perfectly, amazed many. "End is bare aku," he said one day to his colleagues. Other scientists also experienced similar changes. Those who previously only focused on worldly research now began to care more about the values of life, honesty, and justice. Their relationships with each other became more full of respect and affection. This is the end of our video. If you enjoy Islamic content like this, don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next video.